So it's actually really easy to be an activist. When I started, I was 6 feet tall. Now you can see that's what happens to you. And it seems, I just also wanted to say, it seems, it is very humbling for me to be here after the panel that we just had. I thought Stephanie and China, I don't know if they're still here, but they were really an amazing panel. So I just want to take a moment and thank you all if you're still here for what you did. And before I start, there are just 2 corrections I want to make because I don't want to be fired from my job when somebody looks at my resume. I actually didn't go to the University of Pennsylvania, the Wharton School. It's a great school, and if you are going there, more power to you, but I didn't. I was east a little bit. I went to that school. It's in Massachusetts. It starts with an H. I forgot the name. But anyway, I got my professional management development executive MBA there in 1988. And I also didn't start Golden Seeds. I joined Golden Seeds, and I can talk more about that. But it's great when people rod you with things. But I'd like to say that I actually did things. So I want to talk about being out as a woman and out as a lesbian, and sometimes it's hard to know as a lesbian whether you're experiencing sexism or homophobia, because you just get confused between which way you're being discriminated against. You laugh, but it's true. So I put this slide up because I thought, you know, all lesbians play softball. Or did, until it broke up a relationship and we had to take it. And really the message here is don't wait for somebody else to out you, either as a woman or as a lesbian, but be who you are and bring that full self to your work. And so you might ask how you go about doing that, and that's what I'm going to talk about, but I do want to just talk about the fact that even though women legally have all the rights, we still have not achieved. We've made a lot of progress, but we are not there yet, and lesbians don't have all the rights. The only people who can make change in these organizations and in the world for us is us. So if we don't speak up and speak out, you can't expect anybody else to do it for you. And I think a key message in my career is no matter what else you do in your paid profession or what else you do in your MBA, and I know somebody over here, I think it was you, mentioned your first year MBA at MIT, that other school in Massachusetts, and you're the only out lesbian. So no matter what you're doing in your intended career or intended life, I'd like you to consider the possibility of being an advocate from the moment that you leave this Rumble conference, in addition to whatever it is that you intended to do. So throughout my career, I've had the career I got paid for, and then I've had a shadow career, and I'm going to talk more about that as I go forward. So I'm going to just take a few minutes and sort of talk about my life and share some stories, some of which are funny and some of which are sad. And I'm sure you all have those and will have those, but maybe that just gives you a frame of reference of what life was like for me. So there's a picture of my wife. You laugh, actually my wife is better looking than that. But, if this is one of you, I'm really sorry. But I put this up because a couple of months ago I was in the gym at the same time as my wife, and we were each working out on machines. And she came up to talk to me about something, and we had a conversation, and then we both went back to what we were doing. And a guy who was working out across the way came over to me and said, "Your buddy is really buff." And I thought, you know, I'm at the gym to work out. I'm not at the gym to converse, to socialize, to educate. However, I took the moment, I took my earbuds out, I put the weights down, and I said, "That's not my buddy, that's my wife." Based on the fact that he dropped the free weights on his foot, I would say it's the first time that he had ever heard a woman say that. And of course, he would never have said it if it was a male-female. He would have just assumed that that was husband and wife. And so I give that example as as an example of, I just really wanted to work out. I really didn't want to be educating, but it was an opportunity. It was an opportunity to educate in terms of language, maybe begin to change a heart and mind, at least change a perspective. And so I did it. And he never looked at her the same again. It's really interesting because now that he knew that she was a lesbian, somehow he was confused by that. Like, I thought the body was really good looking before, but now that I know she's a lesbian and she likes women, I don't really know what to do with that. And so it really was a teachable moment, and we have thousands and thousands and thousands of those. And it's really exhausting. And for guys in the room, I know you have the opportunity as a gay person to be out, but honestly, as a lesbian, as a lesbian, the opportunities that we have, and as a woman, just are relentless. And whether you're at getting your gas pumped and somebody makes a comment, I remember when our kids were in the back seat of the car and somebody said, well, which of you is the mom? It's like, oh my God, really? I just want gas. Or you're at, you're at the ice cream counter and somebody makes a comment, or you're at the library, or you're anywhere and you think, really, do I want to do this? And the answer most of the times is, for me, no. I don't really want to do it, but I am going to do it because it's my obligation, it's my commitment to my kids, and every opportunity is never going to come again. So I really have this mindset that every time you experience something, whether it's at school or in the workplace or in the world, that opportunity will never come again. And you need to make a choice about whether you want to use that opportunity as a teachable moment or whether you want to let it pass. And I would encourage you not to beat yourself up if you let it pass, because it's impossible to do them all. There's not enough time in the day and you'll be too exhausted. So there are many that I have let pass. However, I would just encourage you to take that extra moment and say, could I take the time now? Would it make a difference to educate somebody if I just took that extra minute? You know, there's a woman whose work I respect deeply named Deborah Meyerson. She's a former professor at Stanford in the business school. And she wrote this book called Rocking the Boat. And it's really about what she calls tempered radicals. How to affect change without making trouble. And actually, if I described my career, I would say that I was a tempered radical. What is, as the book is described, she talks about people who want to become valued and successful members of their organizations without selling out who they are or what they believe in. She writes that these everyday leaders act as crucial sources of new ideas, alternative perspectives, and organizational learning and change. And that these people, and I include myself among them, range from being cautious to being bold, but they all steer a course for positive change. So somebody asked earlier about how do you speak out without being seen as being too aggressive. And what I would just say is, think about your obligation to make your organization a better place. And that if you let a conversation or language go that you know is somehow deleterious for the organization, that you're not helping make your organization a better place. I recall many, many years ago, I was at Schwab, and this was when the sexual harassment laws were first coming out, just to date myself. And I found myself in the elevator with a very, very, very senior person, who's a friend of mine, actually, and he put his arm around me. And I thought, and we were the only two people in the elevator, and I thought, do I just want to let it be because he's a friend of mine, or should I say something? And I actually said something, and I said, you know, I really appreciate the fact that you feel close enough to me that you can put your arm around me, but I want you to understand that actually under the laws of sexual harassment, you really need to ask permission before you do that. And it was a hard thing for me to do, but a really important message for him to learn, because if he did that with somebody else, that could really be deleterious for the organization. And so my justification or rationale to myself was I'm doing the organization a favor, and I'm doing him a favor by, in a very safe and private way, giving him a message that his behavior was not okay. And we still remain friends to this day. So it's the way that I delivered the message. Like, I didn't do it in a public forum, and I didn't embarrass him, but I helped him understand, you know, what the rules were and how he had to just be more thoughtful about that. I want to just tell another brief story. After I had left my corporate life, I've been focusing a lot on philanthropy in addition to being a managing director of Golden Seeds. And I'm not going to name the institution, although somebody here is familiar with it. My wife and I decided to give a donation to a school, it's a nonprofit organization, in honor of our neighbor's daughter graduating from that school. And we gave the donation from our foundation. And the name of our foundation is the Lesbian Equity Foundation. And by the way, that was a very strategic decision, which I'd be happy to talk about. So we gave this donation. It was a small donation, maybe $250. We gave the donation and said, we'd like to honor this person. So a few days later, an envelope arrives back at our house with the donation and a note saying that it can't be accepted. So I knew full well why it couldn't be accepted, but I played ignorant about it. So one of the questions people ask is, like, how do you learn to speak up? One of the things I learned is that if you ask questions, people love to talk. So I went to the school and I talked to, I introduced myself to the person who's head of development. And I said, I got this check back in the mail and I'm confused by it. It's signed, it's got the amount on it, I'm not quite sure. Oh, you'll need to talk to the head of school about it. So then I was quite clear about why they rejected it, because I could tell by her body language and her nervousness. So I made an appointment to see the head of school. And I said, why aren't you accepting our donation? Can you imagine a nonprofit not taking money? But anyway, why aren't you taking this donation? And she said, we have a policy of not taking political donations. And I said, well, this isn't a political donation, this is a foundation. Well, we don't take donations from foundations. And I said, oh, really? So if the Hewlett Packard Foundation made a donation, you wouldn't take it? And she said, well, that's different. And I said, oh, really? What if the name of our foundation was the ABC Foundation? Would you have taken the donation? And she said, well, it's not. That's not the name of your foundation. And I said, that's interesting. So what if the amount of the donation had been $250,000? Would you have taken the donation? And she said, well, it's not. And I said, so the mission of this school, the school we gave to was a girls' school, and the mission is to develop leaders among girls. And I said, what if the name of our foundation was the ABC Foundation and the mission was misogyny? Would you have taken it? And she said, well, it's not. And so I just sort of tell that little snippet because I spent 30 hours talking to the head of school, the development director, and board members for this $250 non-donation. So they never got the $250. And what the issue was is they didn't want to have to put Lesbian Equity Foundation on the plaque in front of their swimming pool, and I guess everybody who made a donation was getting to put up a plaque. Undoubtedly, for $250, the plaque would be unreadable. But be that as it may, they didn't want to take it. And so I tell the story only because I chose to spend 30 hours making a non-donation to make a point to educate, and actually I think the school has done a lot in terms of becoming a much more welcoming organization. But I could have just taken the money back, and I could have, in fact, the woman said to me, the head of school said, if you just write it from your checking account, we would take the money. It's like, really? So, again, that's not a corporate example, but just an example of it was really easy to just write it from another account or not give it at all or let it go, and I chose not to do that. So we all have those kinds of opportunities. So women, like men, only cheaper. You know, when I was at Schwab, I found myself getting paid about 2/3 of what this guy was getting paid for the same job, and I was way better. And one of the things I had to decide is, what am I going to do about that? And I thought about quitting, and I thought about suing, both of which would have been okay. But I'm a big believer in strategic change that allows me to be invited back to the table. That's my own message to myself, my mantra. So I want to be invited back to the table. So quitting wasn't going to get me invited back to the table, and suing certainly wasn't, and would probably make it very difficult for me to pursue a career and get to a higher place of more influence in the organization. So what I ended up deciding to do is just work a lot harder until I made myself invaluable and knew that my boss had to have me around. And then I went and I asked for a raise, and I asked for a raise more than my male counterpart was getting, and luckily I knew how much he was getting. And so, and I got that amount of money. And part of me felt like I was compromising my values because I was working for less than he was working, but I try to balance that short-term, how great it feels when you do something short-term tactical and you've made a change versus what the long-term strategy is. And so not only did I get the raise, I got a promotion, I was able to talk to my boss about how there are inequity in pay, and I was able to be more influential across the broader organization. So one thing I guess I would just caution, and I wish I had known it when I was younger, is that I actually do think most people have good intention, but they need to be educated, and they need to be educated in a way that is safe, and they need to be educated in a way where they see the value to them. And so I certainly made many mistakes in my life and in my career where I didn't do that, and I was impatient, and I also thought the worst of people rather than the best of people. But once I was able to transition into seeing people differently, then I just looked at every opportunity kind of as a game. And it really was, for me, this was really the beginning of my shadow career. How can I make the workplace better for LGBT people, for women, and frankly for Jews, by what kinds of things could I do, what kind of laws could I change, what kind of policies could I make, what kind of language could I change so that it would be a more welcoming place. So there was the career that I was getting paid to do, and then there was my shadow career. And part of what made my career in financial services really fun for me is that I loved the work I was doing, but I also loved the work that I wasn't getting paid to do. And eventually, when I found my shadow career taking so much more of my time than the career that the shareholders of the company were paying me for, I decided to leave. But until that time, what was really great is I felt like the company was getting 2 jobs out of 1. They were getting the job that was on my job description, and they were getting the one that was not on my job description that I just loved. And so I really encourage you to think about how you can make those really maybe sometimes incremental changes, but over time really long-term changes. So at one point in my career, I found myself in the same department as my then partner. And we found ourselves in a hierarchical relationship when she was reporting to me. It was accidental, it had to do with transfers, but that's where we were. Neither of us liked it, we didn't want it to be that way, but so it was. So the head of HR pulled me into his office, and he said, you know, Kathy, you guys can't be in the same department. And I said, of course we can be in the same department. And I knew exactly what he was talking about, which was we have a policy that says people who are married can't be in the same department. But I just played on and said, really, we can't be in the same department and she can't report to me? And he goes, no. And I said, I don't think there's a policy that says that. And he says, sure there is. And I said, could you show me where that is? So he opens the book and it says married people can't report to one another. And I said, well, I totally get that, but we're not married. And he said, but you know what the intent of the rule is, the intent of the policy? I said, oh yeah, I understand the intent. Let's flip it over to the health insurance page. So what was really great is, I hate to date myself, but back in 1987, Schwab became one of the very first companies to offer domestic partners health insurance. And we didn't want to stay in the same department, so it was a bit of a risk if he caved, but he didn't. He said we couldn't stay in the same department. I said, great, as long as we get to be on the same health insurance and it's offered for all LGBT couples, then I'm fine. And so they changed their policy. So again, I did it it pissed me off once I started working there. I thought it was unequal, but I sort of looked for the opportunity presented itself, and how wonderful it was. And really, because he had shown me the policy, the HR policy manual where it said married people can't be in the same department, it really played into my hands. And it was really wonderful, and I think now, he's still a friend of mine, and now as he looks back on it, he realizes that they probably should have done it sooner, but I got to be the impetus that, helped push that forward. So I just encourage you to think about where in your workplace or in your life or in your school there are those issues where if you just tweaked it a little bit, or if you asked somebody to look at it a little bit differently, might there be an opportunity to change policies as well as hearts and minds. The other thing I just want to say, and somebody mentioned it earlier about other kinds of diversity, one thing that I found is that I think language is very exclusionary. And I've been at so many executive meetings where the guys are all talking, and they're talking sports, and they presume that everybody in the room understands the language. Luckily, I do, because I'm a lesbian, so I know all the sports. But there are lots of people who don't, and they'll say, we got to really work on our blocking and tackling, or they'll use language that's sort of not common language. You couldn't really use it in Scrabble as what it really means. And people for whom that is not regular language don't participate in the conversation, because they don't necessarily know what it means. So one of the things I would invite you to do is to notice who's not talking in the room, and think about how you can invite them to participate in the conversation. And often it's the people who don't feel like they can speak up or speak out, and you never get to hear those viewpoints. So you're in a position where you can really be doing that. Got the little 5-minute warning, so I want to make sure I get through. So I want to tell this little story. That here I was out, we got domestic partners health insurance, and I found myself pregnant, the Immaculate Conception, and I thought I was already out. And lo and behold, as soon as I got pregnant, or displayed being pregnant, people said, oh, she must be sleeping with the president. Because how else could she have gotten promoted so quickly? So, that actually wasn't homophobia, that was sexism. And so what do you do with that when you're already out, and that's what people are saying? So fast forward through my pregnancy, I gave birth, and I asked to take maternity leave. And I was told, hey, you're a lesbian, you're not on the mommy track. If we had known you were on the mommy track, we wouldn't necessarily have invested that much in you. And I thought, oh my gosh. They're not upset that I'm a lesbian having a kid. They're upset that they put money into a woman who's asking to take time off. And so I just noticed in my life that sexism and homophobia are often difficult to differentiate, and that it's really important to sort of hone in on what those issues are and address them, address them as they come to you. And so it was, really, you would not have invested in me if you knew that I was going to have a child. And is that what you'd say about a guy? That actually to encourage them to think through what they're saying rather than just what spouts from their mouth. So particularly for the women in the room, as distinct from the men, I think we have a double whammy, which is that you can't tell sometimes if you're being discriminated against because you're a woman or because you're a lesbian, or it's all just meshed in between. But I think it's so important. I know a couple people earlier said, we don't join groups and we don't speak out, we just do our job. But I just know so many people who come after me have to be in the organization that I'm in, and that I have an obligation to do something to make their experience better. So what I want to just close with is, I was very blessed to have a wonderful career that served me well financially and has allowed me to make a difference in the world philanthropically. You have to decide whether you want to help create a place where others, and I put that in quotation, where others can thrive. And that I think, just by virtue of the fact that you're in this room, and I include myself in that, that we are already privileged. And there are other people who are not nearly as privileged as we are. And I know people here are worried about a job and a summer internship and all that. I tend to call those rich white girl problems. And so I just want to keep in perspective that we are very blessed to be in the position that we're in. And I think we have an obligation beyond kind of making money and doing what our career is to make the companies we work for, the organizations we work for, the world we're in a better place. And what drives me, a lot drives me, but one of the things that drives me is, you know, I gave birth to a daughter, then I gave birth to another daughter, and I always think in the back of my mind, would they be proud of how I'm behaving in this situation? If I'm hiding, if I'm shying away, if I'm lying, is that a message that I want to send to them? So maybe most of you in this room don't have kids, some of you might, but for me that's been very helpful, that to have this voice in the back, or voices in the back of my head, to say, here I have to confront another situation at my age all over again. Do I really want to do it? And I think of them and I say, of course I have to do it, because it's the world in which they're going to grow up in. And I had hoped that by now, they're now both in college, I had hoped that by now the world would be a much more welcoming place for women and for lesbians, and frankly for Jews. And in some ways it is, and in some ways it isn't. And until that job is done, I think we all have an obligation to be the out that we wish to see, and not expect somebody else to be doing it for us. So with that, I know you have cocktails. I really appreciate your patience this evening, and thank you.